The grand hall of the Empire gleamed with polished obsidian floors and walls adorned with gold filigree, glowing faintly and bioluminescent chandeliers suspended from towering arches. Everything about the space screamed grandeur, power, and superiority, exactly as the High Council had intended. Rows upon rows of massive chairs lined the perimeter, each seat carved from stone and inlaid with precious metals, large enough to comfortably accommodate the bulk and scales of the reptilian nobility. At the far end of the hall, on a raised dais, sat the High Chancellor's throne, immense and imposing, covered in intricate carvings of ancient conquests. To his left and right, the councillors' seats matched in their oversized, intimidating presence. But what caught the attention of every skilled diplomat and military official present was not these grand thrones, but a single, absurdly small chair placed slightly on the dais. The chair had been hastily prepared for the arriving human delegation. In theory, it had been crafted to accommodate the much smaller frames of humans, but in execution, it looked more like a child's stool than an ambassador's seat. The legs were thin, the cushion barely wider than a dinner plate, and the backrest reached only halfway up what might have been comfortable for someone half the average human height. It sat awkwardly in a space meant for grandeur, dwarfed by the massive furniture surrounding it. Conversations among the whispered and flickered like anxious flames. The intention had been to subtly signal human inferiority, a small seat for a small species, but now they weren't so sure it wouldn't backfire. High Chancellor shifted and comfortably on his throne, the weight of both his ceremonial armor and the silent judgment in the room pressing on his shoulders. He flicked his long tongue in and out in agitation, eyes narrowing on the offending furniture. His aide, a younger councillor named, leaned in close. High Chancellor, perhaps we should replace the chair before they arrive. It appears comical. Waved a claw dismissively, but his expression betrayed unease. It was to remind them of their place, he hissed quietly. But now it risks reminding us of ours. A gentle chime echoed through the hall. The great doors, massive slabs of yellow etched with the history of victories, began to open with a deep, sonorous groan. Every head in the room turned as the human delegation approached. Their entrance was a far cry from the heavy, stomping arrival of reptilian envoys. The humans glided in, their steps measured, calm, and deliberate. Leading them was Ambassador Julia Reyes, her dark uniform crisp, accented by subtle silver embroidery. Her expression was serene, her gaze steady. The delegation behind her followed in perfect formation, each step synchronized, each head held high. The hall fell utterly silent, save for the faint clicking of Julia's polished boots against the stone floor. As she approached the dais, her gaze flickered briefly to the absurdly small chair. The pause was almost imperceptible, but every noticed it. Their scales flushed shades of embarrassment. Would she react with insult, outrage, laughter? But Julia's face remained smooth and readable. She walked calmly to the dais, turned with perfect grace, and sat down upon the tiny chair. The moment was surreal. The human ambassador, a powerful figure, sat perched elegantly on a seat that barely fit her frame. And yet, there was no sign of discomfort or humiliation. Her posture remained impeccable, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't squirm or shift. She simply sat, dignified, composed. Above it all, the murmurs that had started to bubble around the chamber evaporated into stunned silence. High Chancellor felt a wave of heat ripple in his scales. The gesture had been meant to diminish them. Instead, Julia had turned the insult into a demonstration of human adaptability and quiet strength. What could have humiliated her had instead humiliated them. The hall suddenly felt smaller, the weight of the mistake pressing on every scaled shoulder. Julia Reyes met the Chancellor's gaze and offered a subtle, knowing smile. It wasn't smug. It was controlled and diplomatic, but the message was clear. We are not so easily belittled. Whispered urgently, Chancellor, this may be problematic. Didn't respond. He simply stared at the small chair, now transformed from a joke into a monument of the Empire's own miscalculation. The air felt thick and heavy. Julia turned to address the gathered council. Her voice rang clear and even, cutting through the oppressive silence. On behalf of the Terran Republic, we thank you for your hospitality. Her polite nod felt like the final, elegant twist of a blade. The room could only murmur in discomfort, all of them acutely aware that the embarrassment was theirs alone. The banquet hall shimmered with wealth and tradition, vast enough to house an entire starfighter within its gilded walls. Rows of tables stretched the length of the chamber, each one sagging under the weight of elaborate dishes, steaming platters of seasoned meats, crystalline bowls of exotic fruits, and beverages that glowed with bioluminescence. The air was thick with the scents of spices and cooking fires, and the conversation of hundreds of nobles hummed in the background, filled with laughter and smug satisfaction. This feast was intended as both a celebration of the Empire's continued dominance and a subtle demonstration of their superiority to their newest guests, the humans. At the head table, High Chancellor sat with his counselors, their great-scaled bodies lounging comfortably on massive stone seats carved with ancient designs. To his right sat Ambassador Julia Reyes and her small delegation of human envoys. In stark contrast to the elaborate, oversized chairs of the humans sat on far more modest seating, still grand by Terran standards, but clearly made smaller and less adorned to mark their lesser place. The feast began with traditional fanfare, drums that vibrated through the stone floor and singing that reverberated off the polished walls. Servants, draped in fine silks, moved gracefully between tables, setting down plate after plate of ornate alien cuisine. They ate with enthusiasm, tearing into meats with their sharp teeth, savoring dishes that sizzled with unfamiliar spices. They spoke loudly, boasting of recent military victories and trade conquests. But as the humans were served, the noise slowly quieted. The dishes placed before the Terran delegation were, by comparison, underwhelming. Small portions, simple preparations, and flavors chosen to appear bland. It was another calculated slight, designed to remind the humans of their supposed inferiority. The human delegation, however, did not complain. Julia Reyes lifted her glass, examined its shimmering violet contents with polite curiosity, and took a measured sip. Her expression remained perfectly composed. The other humans followed suit, quietly tasting each dish with practiced diplomacy. Their restraint seemed unnatural in a room filled with loud, primal feasting. Where the thar and devoured, the humans sampled and observed. Whispers began to ripple along the tables. Why didn't they react? Where was their dismay? The insults had been clear, yet these humans sat in perfect, unreadable silence. Chancellor leaned forward slightly. I trust the meal meets Terran standards. His voice carried the faintest note of mockery. Julia placed her utensils down with deliberate care and turned to face him. Exquisite, Chancellor. Your culture's culinary traditions are as bold as your reputation suggests. She smiled, genuine but measured. It was impossible to tell whether it was praise or a subtle challenge. One of the younger nobles, emboldened by wine and arrogance, spoke without restraint. Do humans not prefer simpler fare? We were told your palates were unsophisticated. There was an expectant hush. Julia did not flinch. She turned toward the young noble and inclined her head. Simplicity, when executed well, reveals purity of intention. But complexity reveals character. She took another sip from her glass and smiled once more. And character always endures. The hall grew quieter. Even those who had scoffed earlier now shifted uneasily in their seats. The humans' refusal to show irritation or offense, their ability to rise above deliberate insults with pause, was beginning to feel less like meekness and more like power. They were accustomed to dominance through volume and intimidation. But here sat a species that seemed unshaken by provocation, responding not with anger but with composed precision. Tail flicked with annoyance. The dinner was meant to humble, not elevate. He gestured to the servers, who brought out the next course, a massive roasted beast, still sizzling, its aroma potent. As it was placed before the High Chancellor, he addressed Julia Vansmo. You must understand, Ambassador, we value strength here, both on the battlefield and at the table. He tore into the meat with his teeth and claws for emphasis. Julia met his gaze without blinking. We value strength as well, Chancellor. But strength, I've learned, can take many forms. She gestured with an open palm toward the hall. Some measure it by appetite, others by patience. Felt his scales flush darker. The air seemed thicker. The humans continued eating with quiet grace, their measured demeanor slowly becoming the focal point of the entire hall. Laughter and mockery had faded. In their place was a growing, reluctant respect, and a dawning realization that these small creatures possessed something that could not be diminished by spectacle or insult. The feast continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. Every subtle slight had been deflected with calm confidence. Each attempted humiliation became another opportunity for the humans to demonstrate unshakable composure. As the final course was served, the human delegation raised their glasses in unison, offering a simple, dignified toast to enduring partnerships and mutual respect. The private chamber of High Chancellor was dimly lit by soft amber lights, casting long shadows along the engraved stone walls. The chamber smelled faintly of burning herbs and old parchment, the traditional sense of contemplation. Massive stone shelves held relics of the Empire's past glories, polished bones of defeated war beasts, preserved battle standards, and ancient weapons passed down from chancellors long gone. But none of these trophies offered comfort tonight. Sat hunched in his heavy throne, claws tapping absently on the carved armrest, his mind replaying the night's events over and over. The humans were supposed to be humbled, impressed into silence by grandeur. Instead, they had remained serene, turning every slight into a reflection of quiet confidence. A soft chime sounded. The chamber door slid open, and Eldon, one of oldest advisors, entered with a low bow. His scales had dulled with age, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. He spoke without preamble. You're troubled. Exhaled through flared nostrils. They should have been embarrassed. Instead, they embarrassed us. He rose from his throne and paced, each heavy footstep echoing in the silence. I offered them tiny seats and simple food. They thanked me for refinement. I displayed our power. They countered with humility. What species counters aggression with elegance? Folded his hands behind his back. When that does not fear losing face, Chancellor. When that understands that restraint is often the most powerful answer. Turned to him, frustration tightening his jaw. Restraint is weakness. Eyes glinted in the low light. Is it? Or is it control? Consider this, they accepted our slights without complaint, without even subtle retaliation. That requires discipline and absolute confidence. Their power lies not in showing strength at every turn, but in choosing when to reveal it. The Chancellor sat down heavily, the weight of the conversation pressing on his broad shoulders. His gaze flicked to a hologram hovering nearby, a recording of the banquet. He watched as Julia Reyes smiled gently after each provocation, her composure unshaken. He clenched his claws. Do they mock us? No, said softly. They master us. Without words. Without spectacle. That is what disturbs you. Slumped in silence for a moment, staring at the flickering images. They have no claws. No scales. Their bodies are fragile. But they stood in that hall with more presence than most warriors. He let out a bitter breath. How can that be? Stepped closer. Because they are predators of a different kind. Not all hunters roar before they strike. Some wait, measure, and strike with perfect timing. You saw not weakness tonight, Chancellor. You saw dangerous patience. Rose again and moved toward the great window overlooking the imperial gardens, the night sky filled with stars. He spoke more quietly now. We've fought 100 species, each one pastured, Each one challenged us openly. The humans, they disarmed us with silence. Joined him at the window. And that silence will echo louder than any better cry. Turned, a bitter smile tugging at his mouth. They accepted small chairs and plain food, and yet we felt small by the end of the night. Exactly. Nodded. They understand power is perception. They allowed us to display dominance while they displayed grace. Which of those left the stronger impression? The Chancellor looked back to the hologram one more time. Julia Reyes raising her glass, her delegation calm, composed, and utterly untouchable. He closed his eyes. We miscalculated. Placed a hand on shoulder. You misjudged their nature, as many will. But now you know. The question is, what will you do with this understanding? The silence between them grew heavy. Finally, spoke, his voice quiet but resolute. We adapt. We respect. And most importantly, we never underestimate them again. Gave a rare, approving smile. Wisdom, Chancellor. Straightened his posture, regaining some measure of composure. He walked back to the throne and deactivated the hologram. Send word to the council. Tomorrow, view our approach. The Terran Republic deserves a seat equal in size and weight. Inclined his head. It will be done. As the Elden left the chamber, stood alone for a moment longer, staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. He finally understood. The humans did not need to posture or threaten. Their restraint was their weapon. Their ability to endure insult without reaction was not submission but a form of strategic superiority. And in that moment, he realized something else. The most dangerous enemies were the ones who smiled at insults and waited for the perfect moment to remind the galaxy of their strength. The great hall of the Imperial Council was unusually silent. Rows of towering stone pillars lined the circular chamber, each carved with the victories of their ancient past. Normally, these carvings inspired pride. But tonight, they felt like echoes of a world that was no longer certain of its place. High Chancellor sat at the central dais, his imposing frame hunched ever so slightly, his expression grim. Around him, representatives of the various factions and warrior castes sat in tense silence, their eyes flicking between one another, waiting for to speak. A soft hum filled the air as a massive holographic display materialized in the center of the hall. Hovering above the council floor was a rotating image of Earth, ringed with complex symbols and red caution markers flashing in rhythmic pulses. The chamber, despite its size, seemed to contract under the weight of what they all knew but had not yet spoken aloud. Voice finally broke the silence, deep and steady but laced with reluctant respect. We have tried to humble them. We have tried to intimidate them. But tonight, we acknowledge a truth that none of us wished to face. He paused, eyes scanning the room. The weight of his words hung in the air. Humanity is not a force to be dismissed, nor are they to be provoked. The hall remained silent, save for the faint crackle of energy from the hologram. Gestured toward the projection. Their bodies are fragile. Their world, insignificant in size. And yet he motioned again, and footage of the state banquet played. Julia Reyes and her Terran delegation seated on the small chairs, accepting every slight with polite smiles and warm toasts. The playback looped on Julia's final words. We are grateful for your hospitality. The hall filled with murmurs, the implications sinking in. Commandant, a general known for his bluntness, stood. With respect, Chancellor, we have seen their diplomats' skill. But they are soft. Fixed his gaze on. Are they? He raised a claw and changed the projection. Footage from another encounter appeared. Unarmed Terran operatives in civilian dress subduing armed attackers with calculated precision, disarming with fluid movements and terrifying efficiency. The room fell silent once more. Sat down without another word. The Chancellor continued. They possess something our warrior culture fails to comprehend, restraint. It is not weakness. It is patience. The patience of a predator that knows when to show its claws. Eldon stepped forward, his robes whispering against the stone floor. His voice was gentle but firm. For millennia, we have measured strength by ferocity, by dominance. The humans measure it by control. Nodded slowly. And control is power. A power more enduring than any roar of defiance. The chamber doors opened quietly as messengers brought updated intelligence reports. The data streamed into the hologram, fleet movements, intercepted communications from other species reconsidering their alliances with the Empire. The council members shifted uncomfortably. The galaxy was watching. And the galaxy was recalculating. Looked around the room, his tone shifting from solemnity to resolve. The Terran Republic will no longer sit on token chairs. They will be given full recognition in this council. Equal seats. Equal voice. A ripple of uneasy murmurs swept the chamber. The old traditions did not yield easily. But raised his hand. We can either adapt, or we can become a cautionary tale carved in stone. He fixed his gaze on each representative in turn. And make no mistake, if we fail to recognize their strength, we will fall to it. Eldon added, we have seen the glimmer of something olden in them. A survival instinct as old as the stars themselves. It is in their history. In every battle. In every slight they absorb without retaliation, until they decide otherwise. The murmurs died down. Slowly, van by van, the council members inclined their heads. Spoke the final decree. Let it be recorded in the archives of this council and broadcast to our allied worlds. The Empire recognizes the Terran Republic as an equal force in this galaxy. They will no longer be underestimated. They will no longer be provoked without consideration. A final confirmation chime echoed in the hall as the decree was sealed into record. The hologram shifted, now displaying Earth with new markings, not warnings, but acknowledgement. A neutral symbol, recognized by all council worlds, sovereign and respected. Set back, the burden lifting slightly from his broad shoulders. He had not expected to be the Chancellor who would make this declaration. But perhaps that was fate. To lead, sometimes, meant having the courage to abandon pride and see things as they truly were. As the council adjourned, remained seated for a moment longer, watching the rotating image of Earth. A small, blue world, quiet and unassuming. But inside it burned something that made even ancient empires reconsider their place in the cosmos. He finally allowed himself a quiet smile. Tiny seats, he muttered under his breath, for giants in disguise.